Words can hardly describe how many absurd, malicious, and downright stupid lies mainstream media in the West is spewing out on a daily basis because the war in Ukraine is not going like Western elites want it to go. In recent days, a series of articles published by garbage dumps such as the Atlantic Council, Vox, BBC, basically the usual Western media garbage, came to my attention. Now, what all of these articles had in common is that they all describe the Ukrainian army as being well motivated, as fighting to the death because they know that they have to resist the Russian invasion because the very existence of their country is at stake. And this is the lie that I want to debunk today. Isn't it a bit silly, or rather downright moronic, to assume that somebody is going to fight to the death, that they're going to sacrifice their lives for the infamously, ludicrously corrupt excuse of a government that is the Ukrainian government? Or that they would even sacrifice their lives for Ukraine as a country which is younger than most Ukrainians are? Do these people seriously think that Ukrainians, whether by ethnicity or by nationality, all form some sort of a collective hive mind or something? Like, I'm struggling to follow their logic. Why do these people think that your average Ukrainian Joe, who was born in the USSR, is going to suddenly sacrifice his life to die needlessly, to basically be cannon fodder that was thrown up against the Russian army and died in the name of Ukrainian oligarchs and the foreign-controlled government that is the post-Maidan Ukrainian regime? Now, I don't think it needs to be explained in great detail that the post-Maidan government, this regime that came to power after 2014, is not very popular throughout most of Ukraine. Like, it's the reason why there is this civil war that started in 2014 in the first place. I could bring up tons and tons of scandals that the Ukrainian government has been through over the last 8 years. If I were to bring up all of them from the top of my head, this video would probably be an hour long, but perhaps the most famous ones are the Biden-Burisma scandal, where Hunter Biden, the son of the current US president and then US Vice President Joe Biden, served on the board of directors of the Ukrainian natural gas company Burisma, officially made a salary of $50,000 per month, despite knowing absolutely nothing about energy, despite being as unqualified for the job as anyone could possibly be, made that much money in Ukraine, where salaries are an order of magnitude lower than they are in Western countries. $600,000 per year. That is like making $6 million or so dollars in the United States. That is a truly insane amount of money. And that is just the official salary. Of course, there is almost certainly a vast unofficial sum that isn't being quoted or stated anywhere. I could bring up about how Joe Biden literally bragged on US national television about getting the general prosecutor of Ukraine fired, because the general prosecutor dared to try and investigate Joe Biden's corrupt dealings in Ukraine. Those are just a couple of ugly reminders from modern history, but perhaps the most significant such sign of corruption that I can bring up, and the most recent, is the fact that right now, as a global food crisis is becoming imminent, Ukraine's vast supplies of grain and wheat are being shipped out of the country and sent westwards. And doesn't it seem strange that a country which is at war, which has had about half of its economy destroyed since February 24th, and is therefore the country that should logically be at the highest and most imminent risk of facing a starvation crisis, is also the country that is sending out grain towards much wealthier countries in the West? And if you ask me, this really looks like the Ukrainian government sacrificing the well-being and security of its own people, of its own population, in order to ensure that the interests of foreign elites are met, and that these foreign elites do not have to deal with a food crisis that is as severe and a food crisis which could potentially lead to an uprising in their own countries. Now, I don't think I need to go into great detail explaining that any government which cares more about foreign elites than its own people is one that is hopelessly corrupt and one that isn't going to receive widespread support from its own domestic population. Certainly, not many people are going to be willing to die in the name of that government. And this is an ongoing problem. This is a recurring theme in US proxy wars. This is something that the US government faced in South Vietnam when it tried to back the South Vietnamese government against the Viet Cong and ultimately found itself directly involved in the Vietnam War and then ended up losing that war. This is the problem that the United States faced during its intervention in Iraq when it tried to set up some sort of pro-Western, stable government amid the ruins of Saddam Hussein's Iraq. This was an ongoing problem in Afghanistan, where the incredibly corrupt Afghan national government had basically no support from Afghanistan, the people of Afghanistan at large, outside of the capital city, that is. And it is clearly becoming a problem in Ukraine as well. Contrary to all of these fairy tales that we are hearing from mainstream media about the Ukrainian army being so well trained, so well motivated, the facts on the ground, especially over the course of the last several days, show a Ukrainian army which is not fighting to the death, which is not fighting the Russians to the very last drop of Ukrainian blood. And I will also say this: if Ukraine really coalesced together as a nation and as a people under this invasion, if Ukrainians really united together and if they all wanted to stick it to Russia as much as possible, if this really was not just a war between the Zelensky government and these 200,000 or so Russian soldiers that are in Ukraine, but if this was a people's war in Ukraine, then Russia would have seen far less battlefield success than it actually did up until now. And for starters, not only the battle for Mariupol, but also the battles for places such as Melitopol and Kherson would have still been ongoing. And of all of these, Mariupol is perhaps the most notable. We need to mention the surrender at Azovstal once again briefly, where, according to recent reports from the very Ukrainian soldiers and Azov battalion fighters who came out of that steel plant and surrendered to the Russian soldiers, the most interesting detail is that they still had plenty of food and water to keep on fighting when they chose to surrender. And of course, unsurprisingly, they also had plenty of weaponry and ammunition. Reports are that they had several mortars, several multiple launch rocket systems, and even 2 fully functional loaded tanks that were ready for battle. And this is the Azov battalion that we are talking about. These are the hardcore neo-Nazis who know perfectly well that they aren't going to receive any mercy from either the people or the government of the Donbas republics or from the Russian government should they surrender. They know that they really don't have any option to surrender, and yet many of them would clearly sooner rather surrender than die despite this fact. And of course, the regular Ukrainian army is in a much worse position. Over the last several days, every single day has seen some new video either showing Ukrainian prisoners of war or platoons, battalions, various army formations of the regular Ukrainian army, or even of the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Forces, which is this paramilitary organization of draftees, basically recording these videos publicly recording their refusal to fight against the Russian army, refusing to be sent in as what they perceive to be cannon fodder in order to die for the glory of Ukrainian oligarchs. And don't get me started on the fact that so many military-aged Ukrainian men have fled the country. Ukrainians, by and large, are trying to avoid the draft, even as the Zelensky government is talking about creating a 1 million-man army. An army which would, in practice, only have 500,000 soldiers, if even that many, all of which would be under-equipped, under-trained, and would have virtually no combat experience. Everyday Ukrainians are trying to flee. This is the reason, or perhaps the consequence of the fact that there is no people's war in Ukraine, like, for example, there was in the Soviet Union during World War II. When the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, you didn't see many Soviet citizens trying to flee the Soviet Union, trying to flee the war. That became a popular war. It became a people's war. And the Soviet Union ultimately won because tens of millions of Soviet civilians went to the front lines willingly. They were ready to die for their government, for their country, but perhaps more importantly, they were willing to die against a fascist invading regime. The same simply isn't happening in Ukraine today. The invader is not some fascist that wants to genocide every single Ukrainian to the last man, woman, and child. Although I will mention that this is exactly what Western mainstream media and political circles are trying to pretend is happening. And the defender isn't some sort of large, proud, sovereign country, which is run by a government that has popular support among its people. Now, to be fair, I might be exaggerating the support that the general public had for Stalin's Soviet Union a little bit, but I think it's safe to say that the support that Stalin's administration had was orders and orders of magnitude higher than the support that any post-Maidan Ukrainian government has had. So remember this the next time you hear some shill salivating to the idea of the proud, free, democratic Ukrainians fighting to the death in the name of their government, in the name of their country, to stick it to Russia and to please their Western backers. By and large, everyday Ukrainian people are not their government. They are everyday people like you and I who have their own goals, their own interests, and their own aspirations, none of which involve being sent to the front lines as cannon fodder to die fighting against a vastly superior Russian army in the name of Ukrainian oligarchs and the foreign-controlled post-Maidan Ukrainian government. Remember this the next time you read idiotic articles like this one from the Atlantic Council, which are still talking about Ukrainian victories and how Ukraine is beating the Russian army even after everything that has happened, and which are seriously talking about Russian conscripts being sent to fight a fully professional, 100% trained volunteer Ukrainian military, even as Russia has sent 0 conscripts to fight in Ukraine, whereas Ukraine is conducting its 4th wave of mobilization, recruiting people from 18 to 60 years old, and is talking about organizing an army of 1 million soldiers, of whom almost none, obviously, will have any training or equipment or experience to speak of. So this is the cognitive dissonance that we are seeing from mainstream media in the West. And frankly speaking, this is neither surprising nor new. One thing that I completely agree with Donald Trump on, former US President Donald Trump, is when he said that mainstream media is the enemy of the people. Stupidity, ignorance, and mainstream media are all enemies of humanity. Anyways, on that note, I would like to now conclude this video. I thank you all for watching. I hope that you liked this video, that you found it informative. If you did, if you are watching this on YouTube, please be sure to hit the like button since it helps the algorithm make the video more popular, recommend it to more people. And also, please be sure to check out my other channels on Telegram and on Rumble. The links to both will, as always, be in the video description. Telegram and Rumble are both amazing free speech platforms with zero political censorship, and Telegram in particular is very convenient in that it allows me to write up small text posts without having to make entire videos, and also in the fact that there are many other channels on Telegram which offer live updates for the situation in Ukraine, and Telegram has become by far the most popular app when it comes to receiving these live updates on how the situation on the ground is developing. And also, if you are watching this on Rumble, the links in the video description will be to my Telegram and YouTube channels respectively. Anyways, with all of that said, I once again thank you for watching this video and wish you all the best.